Hi, everybody. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. My name is Simon Bradberry. I am the Vice President for Allegis Global Solutions in the EMEA region. And I am joined today by two esteemed colleagues. I'm joined by Halliwell, who's the Executive Director for Service Excellence, and Ewan Greig, who's a Workforce Solutions Consultant for us. So welcome to both of you. Great to see you today.
Hi, Simon.
Now,
Hi, Simon.
Now great to see you. So we had a recent workshop roundtable where we talked about the topic was talking about addressing workforce challenges with your executive committee, and within that roundtable we had a number of people that joined in the conversation. And what we're going to do is unpack what happened, reflect on the conversation that took place, and essentially share with people exactly what we talked about, so everyone can have a little bit of a taste of what the conversation was about. Now, Kat, I'm going to come to you first, if that's okay. How did this session come about? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. So I think right now there is essentially what is being known as a global workforce crisis. So post-pandemic, we found that the workforce is just much less than it was before, with people leaving the workforce and not returning. And organizations need to really rethink the way that they get work done. So I think that the concept of the workforce and the conversations around it have really become elevated. And we've seen organizations that are driving change around how they do this. But actually, one of the key questions that really comes out is we know that in order to drive this strategic organizational level change, you really need to have the buy-in and the engagement from C-suite and board level people within the organization. So we've introduced a tool called the Workforce Maturity Diagnostic that really engages people from across the organization and allows people within HR and TA to elevate that conversation. And so we brought this group together to talk through that and real life examples of how that works.
Okay, great. Well, more of that later, no doubt. Ewan, let me come to you. Share your reflections, the main areas that we talked about, kind of the key topics, and what were your takeaways?
Yeah, so I think that the key thing that stood out for me is that a lot of people in the room were looking to talk about strategic workforce planning, and almost looking to it as a topic, as a magic answer to solving the workforce crisis that Kat's referring to. And we had a good mix of experience in the room, some people on the start of that journey, some really advanced practitioners, actually, from my perspective. And I think what really came through was that people agreed that actually, no matter what you're doing, what we've got to accept is that nobody knows the future. We don't know what's going to happen. There is always going to be uncertainty, and we've just got to learn to live with that. I think the advanced practitioners in strategic workforce planning were really highlighting there's a lot of work to do, there's a lot of what ifs to ask, and actually there's only a 6-month life cycle on your plan. 6 months later, the market's changed. You've got to replan, think out your different scenarios. And actually what they were saying was we often don't get the exact scenario, so we still have uncertainty. So what people started moving towards was that what we really need is agility. Because we don't know what's going to happen, we've got to be agile. And that led to people moving towards the sort of notion of harmonization. So at the moment, we've got traditional models where you've got a different perm team looking at your permanent recruitment. So very much siloed. So a team looking at your contingent recruitment, maybe someone looking at your service provider, and you've got to decide which one you want before you start hiring. And actually, agility suggests if you harmonize all of those and just have one access point, who you talk to about the work you've got to get done, you can then say, let's consider all these different types. Let's look at data around the market about what's going on now, no matter how the market's evolved, what skills are available, how much do they cost, where are they? And you can really then start thinking, what's the best way to get the work done at that moment in time? And that's what brings true agility.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Ewan. And certainly I remember from the conversation as we were talking about that issue around agility and harmonization of different channels to the workforce, it was a consensus that you can't do that without having buy-in from that C-suite, that senior level that Kat was referring to right at the very beginning. So let's get into that bit, Kat, that you're referring to now. Tell us again what you remember from the conversation, like what we talked about and what was shared.
Yeah, and I think it was again a consistent theme that came up. People know that in order to drive this type of change, you do require significant organizational level buy-in, and that comes from the board and the C-suite. And so we were talking around how to do that, how to engage the conversation and make it really focused around business objectives, and not just be focused on how do we hire the right people, but how do we get work done to achieve our goals. And so we were talking through the workforce maturity diagnostic and how that collates information that turns into meaningful data that can be presented back. So the way essentially the diagnostic works is we work with those C-level executives, and we really understand from their perspective how they think the organization works today, and also how they think it needs to work in the future in order for those objectives to be met. We do the same exercise with the user groups and the hiring managers. And then we look at the difference that exists between the current state and the desired future state. And on the basis of that gap analysis, what we're able to do is really plot a unique roadmap or blueprint, along with prioritization that allows an organization to make the shifts that they need to in order to meet those objectives. And so as a tool, what it really allows us to do is to elevate the conversation of the workforce beyond recruitment, and actually focus on meeting business goals and objectives.
Great. And so just share a little bit about experience that you've had in terms of actually delivering this. Is this something that's kind of real, that there are actually companies out there that are trying to get that elevation, or is it more of an ambition that the organizations want to move to in the near future?
Yeah, it's very much real. So I conducted a workforce diagnostic recently with an organization who just recognized that what they were doing today was not going to be enough to deliver the growth that they were looking for in the future. And so they knew that they had to do something different. And so I spent around 6 weeks with this client organization, really speaking to their C-suite. So whether that was the CFO, their CHRO, COOs and business leaders, again, understanding all of that information. So looking at their workforce acquisition, looking at their processes, the governance that they have around it, and being able to really understand where they see themselves today, and how that impacts their ability to kind of move forward into those growth conversations. Essentially, I produced a 30-page report that went back to the CHRO, and we presented that to the board. So it's a real life thing that is driving real life transformation, and is really good at equipping the senior leaders within the organization with that roadmap, because they know it's a challenge. This helps them get the answer of how to solve it.
Okay, that's amazing. Thank you very much. So to just recap where we are so far, we talked about the initial conversations around getting work done in a different way. How do we bring the workforce in? We've talked about harmonization being an objective to do that in a better way. We've talked about the necessity to look at the executive leadership with an organization, getting them on board if that's going to be a reality. But and that wasn't everything we talked about, was it? There were some other areas as well. What other areas could you bring to life that were part of the conversation?
Yeah, so I'd agree with that. I mean, there were lots of things we covered, but a big standout for me was a whole conversation about task versus role-based hiring. And I think there's a general consensus in the room that was the right way to go, to look at tasks as opposed to just the traditional role profile. But I think there was a big concern about the practical reality of trying to apply that on a day-to-day basis. And a concern almost of, does it mean that we've got to, every time someone's looking to hire an individual, you break down their role, you split it out? Because if you're doing that, that's going to slow down your whole process, and hiring managers are not going to be happy, and it's not going to be good for the business. That sort of interacted with a whole idea about, do you need a really clear skills taxonomy in your enterprise? And that is a whole nother conversation, because there was a big piece about the challenges of trying to do that. But I think what really hit home for me about the practicality of task versus role-based hiring was an example around an organisation that we've worked with who are heavily reliant on a large estate of nurses within their workforce. And they were having a great time, growing successfully, huge growth path continuing. But that growth was starting to falter because they were struggling to keep the number of nurses they needed to facilitate their business, let alone grow it in line with the growth plans they had. So we worked with them to apply a notion called deconstruction, which a lot of sort of leading academics on the future of work, including people like John Boudreau, apply. And effectively, we did a time and motion study with a lot of their nurses, not all of them, but a big part of their nurses, and found that actually only 30% of their time was spent on top of licensed activity, by which I mean activity that actually requires them to have a nurse's qualification. So we worked with them to reconstruct the role, to remove tasks that they didn't have to do. Some of it could be automated, some of it could be given to less skilled individuals, let's say. And actually what it meant was that their role, the tasks they were asked to do that were top of license, made up 85, 90% of their time. And immediately the company started looking at saying, well, do we actually need to double the size of our workforce? Or actually, we've got far more capacity to grow with the people we've got now. And what we need to hire are different and more available skills out there in the market. And I think that really resonated with people to start thinking, it's not every single time I hire, but it's a notion about how I start thinking about the work that we've got to get done from a task perspective rather than traditional jobs.
Okay, that's great. Great example, Ewan. Thanks very much. Kat, I just want to come back to you. I want to begin to start summarising any other areas that you wanted to talk about, or any sort of summary you want to share as we begin to bring things to a close.
Yeah, I think for me it was really interesting that the people that we were talking to in the room were from such a broad range of organizations and industries, but the themes and the challenges that these organizations were facing were thematically the same. So, whilst there was different approaches being taken of how to potentially solve this and different ideas and kind of viewpoints, I think the thing that for me that really stood out was this is, the kind of conversations that are happening is, if this is a representative sample, these types of conversations are happening in every company all over the world. And for me, that was really interesting, just to kind of see the level of consistency that was existing in the room.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. As something, it was fascinating to take a step back and think, wow, this is really real. Everyone contributed, and everyone definitely had something to say about how this resonated with their own organisation. Ewan, finally, come to you. How would you sort of summarise the evening? Any final takeaways?
Yeah, I think first thing for me was it's great to be back in a room with people actually having a conversation, which was, refreshing. So I'd agree with what you guys said, but the thing that stood out for me, though, is it's a quite nice mix of opinions. Not everyone agreed with each other. So, there were some contradictory views. Even though the themes we're talking about, they were consistent, there were still people who didn't have to agree on everything, but they did come down to the same themes. I think the additional piece I'd highlight, though, is that what everyone is saying is that we need to change what we're doing. What we're currently doing isn't working. We've got challenges. Those challenges look set to get worse, even though, unemployment might be due to rise. Accessing the skills we need is not an easy thing. So we want to change, we want new ideas, but critically, we've got to get senior level buy-in to actually make those changes become a practical reality within our business. So yeah, that's the standout for me.
Yeah, thanks, Ewan. I mean, I absolutely agree with that final point there. There's definitely a sense that everyone around the room was like, what does this mean for us? What's the next step? How can we take things forward, and who do we need to engage with? So I completely agree with you. And that's why, because we feel there's such an exciting time of change, that's why we're having these sessions and having this conversation. I do also want to highlight some of the other areas we've done. For example, obviously the book, The Universal Workforce Model, I've got a copy of it behind me that I wrote with Bruce Morton and with John Boudreau, and you and yourself, you contributed very significantly to that as well. That really pulls together a lot of these topics that we published earlier this year in terms of how practically can we see the future, what might a new model look like in terms of getting more out of the workforce and in terms of being able to engage the workforce and get work done in a different way. So anyone that is interested in getting a hard copy of that book, please get in touch with us. There's a link attached to the video. There's also via our website the ability to download an electronic version of that, but I'd strongly recommend that. Intentionally written to be an easy read, under 100 pages, and probably takes a few hours to read, but hopefully gives a lot of value. that just leaves me to say thank you very much. Thank you to both of you for your time now. Thank you for your time on the evening. Thank you to everyone that attended. I think it's been a fabulous summary of what we talked about. I do also want to say thank you to the Business Transformation Network, who were instrumental in setting up the evening, and you know, we organised that collectively, and that we really could not have done any of this without them. So thank you very much to BTN as well. And thanks for listening and for watching. Appreciate it, and speak to you all again soon.